Here's a simple boat painting, a simple boat drawing based on the basket boats of Moulinet. Hello, my name is Tim Wilmot. I'm a watercolor painter and a watercolor tutor, creating tutorial videos up here on YouTube. And this video is based on a photograph kindly shared to me by a Patreon member of mine, Ravi. Thanks very much, Ravi. This is I believe this is Moulinet. I hope I pronounced it right. Moulinet in Vietnam, and the iconic basket boats that are there. Very interesting boats here. I believe these basket boats that dot the waters all over the coast of Vietnam. The origins of these, they're a bit like coracles, really, that we have in the UK. But the thought is that they were born out of the ingenuity during the French colonial era. And as the story goes, when the French levied taxes on boats in Vietnam, the fishermen couldn't afford to pay them. So they designed these circular woven baskets in bamboo just so that they happened to function as boats, but they were classified as baskets, and they become popular. A lot of these modern ones now are cladded in more modern materials, fiberglass, and they can last a long time. They're very durable. So these are the iconic then basket boats, really simple boats to paint. They're just like just think of them like a cereal bowl in a way. So in this video, I'm going to go through the complete painting process, discuss composition, my drawing, my painting, and then we'll do a bit of critique at the end of it. Now there's three main things in this picture. First of all, we want to get right these boats, these conical boats, and notice that they've got a smooth surface to them. They're obviously circular, they're conical. There's a bit of light hitting the side facing us. We've got this. I think the only difficult thing about them is that rim, this rim going around the top. And a little bit of light obviously facing us, but then slightly darker above and below that, quite dark underneath the rim as well. I'm going to include some fishermen in the scene, 3 or 4 fishermen with another sort of iconic shape, the conical hats that they have. So a few of those. And then thirdly, the third key element are these palm trees, the background trees, giving it a sort of tropical look to the scene, to sort of really place it in that area of the world. Moulinet, hopefully I pronounced it right, Moulinet in Vietnam. Also, the beach. This beach has got lots of bits of material on it. Some litter there, paper, plastic. Maybe we can give a bit of interest to the beach. So from a composition point of view, that's my focal point. This blue basket boat here. Thinking about the colours, that one's blue. We've got some lighter green boats as well. We'll have a few of those spattered around. I want to have them at different angles. These are all really level, so maybe I can tilt them a little bit because of the contours of the beach. I'm not going to put in this boat here in the background. That boat, it's difficult I don't think it would float. So I think it's just being beached there and it's just disintegrating. I can't imagine that would float. Look at the back end of that boat. No, that's not going anywhere. So from a composition point of view, that's my focal point. I'm going to raise it slightly, raise the horizon slightly, and then I've got more of the beach to play with. And then balance things up with the figures, let's say with those conical hats, and include a few more palm trees in the background. There's just this solitary large one, this tall one in the source photo, and there's quite a few there. In the distance, lower palm trees, but I think we need to fill in that sky there, fill in that space. It's too empty. So let's see how we get on. Paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford cold press, 300 grams. And so cold press, this is the medium texture, not too rough, not too smooth. Taped down all sides. I'm not pre-wetting. I don't haven't stretched the paper. That's the right terminology. But the first thing is to get the initial drawing right, and these relatively simple boat shapes, the basket boats, I think they're a little bit like a bowl, like a cereal bowl or something like that. And I've got to have a few of them at different angles, receding into the distance, behind each other like that. Yes, they're a bit like a bowl, but the most difficult bit, I think, is going to be the top of the boat, just there where I'm drawing top of the boat. It's like a sort of rim, a fat rim around the top of the boat, which I guess is for buoyancy or some sort of flotation thing. And it's catching the light just a little bit. So getting those basket boat shapes right, and then next the conical shapes of some figures. I'm including some figures. I've started with the boat, get that right as a focal point, and the main boat not dead in the middle, just slightly left of the center, and then a few figures with these conical hats again at different angles, and then the face, quite simple figures because their legs are, or those two figures, their legs are hidden by the boats. Then a third one over here on the right. Again, the hat at a different angle, a full figure this time. Not exactly sure what this person or which direction this person is going. Might decide that come the actual painting stage, but just get the proportions right. So just a tiny bit bigger than the two other figures. Simple background. So a third element of this painting is the palm trees reaching out into the sky, but simple background, nothing too complicated, nothing too detailed. I want the main focus to be on the boats and just a few figures around them, and the beach, of course, the surface of the beach and stones and different materials on the beach. So that's it from a drawing point of view. I haven't painted in, or haven't drawn in, the palm trees. I'll wait to the painting stage to decide on the placement of those palm trees in the sky and their tree trunks as well. So once I'm happy with the drawing, I'm now pre-wetting the paper. So the paper's not stretched, but I'm pre-wetting the paper to help me get a really smooth wash in the sky there. Now, the sky has got, it's not many clouds in the sky, but they're sort of high clouds. They're very, very thin clouds. So I just want to give the impression of those with the light coming from the right-hand side. I'm going to go a little bit darker in the top left corner and then keep the sky fairly light over on the right-hand side. And on this wet surface, I'm now applying some thicker paint into this damp surface just to give me the feeling of the brighter sky, the clearer sky in between those high clouds. I'll just go over my palette here, the colours I've got. From the top, I've got neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, just used then, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, which is going to be just the right colour, I think, for some of these boats, and then cerulean blue, cobalt blue, and ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Winsor red, that brightish red there. I used to use cadmium red, changed to Winsor red, and it's cheaper. And then I've got light red, cadmium orange, and lemon yellow. I've just painted in the background of the background, the background, sort of low, that kind of low ridge behind the beach, and coming down over the boats, an initial wash over these boats. So most of them are that sort of cobalt green, but this main boat is going to be a darkish blue. And it's going to be a little bit in the shade. Now I've painted over the outline shapes of the boats, and then now painting in the colour of the beach, which is mostly a yellow ochre there, little bit of cerulean blue just to cool it down a bit, and going up to the edge of the boats, so I can get, well, I do get a little bit of a soft edge, but I'm going to harden that edge up with shadows at a later stage. The important part here is to cover up this beach. Don't need to be too precise with the painting within the boundaries of these objects. When I go in with my darker shadows later on, I can define those boat shapes a little bit more clearly. So coming on down to the bottom of the paper, yellow ochre again. While the paper's still damp, I can be still applying pigment in there and alternating a little bit of a blue into the mix, just to give it a few different tints and hues in that beach colour. Maybe a little bit stronger in the immediate foreground. Bit of ultramarine blue there. Ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, bit of burnt umber. A lot of this foreground here will be covered in a shadow. Got this planned shadow going across the scene from the right hand side and creeping into that blue boat, going over that blue boat. But that blue boat will be partially in the shade. Now with a synthetic brush here, I'm just lifting out now to get the light hitting the fronts of these boats and getting that soft edge around that bright area. I'm using a synthetic brush here, just to a synthetic brush that I've dipped in some clear water, squeezed out a lot of the moisture on that brush, and then just applying it over, just lifting off this damp paint to expose a little bit more of the paper, and I'm going to get that soft edge. Try and get it on the rim of the boat there, but I can emphasize that rim with some dark shadow underneath. So I've got the front of that, the front edge of that rim, and then the back edge as well, a little bit light. So hopefully starting to see these basic boat shapes appear. Now these boats, they're not they're not in pristine condition. They're a little bit bashed and battered, and there's some dark vertical lines on them, stains and so on. I'll add in those imperfections at a later stage. Now, if you like painting projects like this, please have a look at my Patreon site, patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. Think of it like a little club, a little friendly watercolor club where I set monthly projects similar to this, and we all have a go painting it, and you get a critique from me, and I share a high-res image of the source photo. I share a high-res image of my meager effort for you to take a look at. So yeah, please get involved. Go up to patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. So I'm still doing a little bit of lifting out here. Want to make sure. Now these conical hats, they're not bright white, so I painted over those in my initial wash stage, but they'll appear lighter when I go in with the background foliage. They should then pop out with a little bit of careful painting around those. Just starting to put in some initial shading on some of these boats, just on the edge there on the left hand side, and the paper still being fairly damp. I'm getting a soft edge. If that dark colour is too strong or not moving far enough, you can see there I just use my fingertips as gently as I can just to nudge the paint along. And you've got to be careful using your fingers. You could end up with, if you went in too heavy-handed, it could be a little bit sort of smudgy, if that's the right word. Look a little bit untidy. And I can apply a little bit of clear water here for some splattering, which I might paint over. I'm just keeping my options open. They could be those little marks that are appearing there. They could be some lighter stones that we can see on the beach. Little raised areas of the sand on the beach. Could be anything. Apart from Patreon, there's a regular online workshops I run online. It's on the Crowdcast platform. If you go up to crowdcast.io/Tim Wilmot, normally on a monthly basis. This is nothing to do with Patreon. So go up to Crowdcast, and most months if I've got time, I'll run a live online watercolour workshop where I choose a different subject every month, maybe seasonal, from different locations around the world. So this is Southeast Asia. Maybe I'll do one from Asia, from this location. I don't know. So it's a monthly basis, and you follow me over 2 hours painting live, and you can ask loads of questions. Hopefully I'll give the right answers, and a bit of fun. And again, I create if you see on YouTube, I've got a number of group critique videos that I've done in the past from previous month's workshops. Have a look at those. Right, background. So I didn't draw in those palm trees. I'm just trying to do the best I can to give the impression of these distant trees. So starting from the left-hand side, keeping it fairly light in value. I don't need to be too hung up with the colour. Now, the brush I'm using here is quite an old ox hair brush. It's seen better days. It's a little bit threadbare, or there's not many hairs left on it, but it's quite good for doing trees and foliage because of the randomness of the brush marks that you can sometimes make. If there's not too much paint on the brush, and it's not dry, it's just kind of in the middle of paint on the brush, you can get some quite nice effects, really capitalizing on what watercolor does. Now, as I'm coming down to the tops of these boats, I'm beginning to create the form of those boats, and maybe more boats might appear just by adding in some horizontal lines. We can maybe see the tops of other structures appearing. So quite a sort of exciting part of the painting when you're going over the brush like this, just to see what extra objects can appear. Now, this is that fourth figure. I sneaked in quite a small one there in the background, but immediately we should be able to see with that this iconic conical hat first appearing, and we're beginning to see the feeling of these fishermen going about their tasks, their jobs on their boats. Continue now the background, going to the right and getting stronger. Now, with these palm trees, I'm not going to, if you attempt this scene, I'm not making the palm trees totally symmetrical, and there's a little bit of a lean to some of these taller trees as well. I guess where the prevailing wind is coming from, it's pushing those palm trees that way. So that's a very important palm tree I did there in the middle, trying to get that one right. The actual skyline needs to be quite irregular, not straight at all. I might need to go a little bit more, add in a few more objects piercing the sky later on. Go a little bit warmer in that area there, and then we've got this gap between the first fisherman and the group of two. This paint is going to dry lighter as well, so you've got to compensate that with watercolor, going a little bit darker. I want to create a bit of impact with as I'm going over to the right, this darker background against the lighter objects of the figures and the hats and the boats. Right, third fisherman. I'm painting over their faces because their faces will be in the shade, because of the hat and the bright sun. Now coming down between the two, just finish it off quite lightly like that, and then down the right hand side of this figure. Continue on, cobalt green, Phrygian green, bit of burnt sienna. try and getting quite a rich green. Now, it doesn't matter if I leave in little gaps, very small little parts of the paper unpainted. They can be just, well, little objects. In the source photo, there was sort of lots of buildings and structures in the background. Well, these little bits that I'm leaving unpainted could be the tops of those objects just catching the light. Another palm tree. Let's have a couple in here and one next to it. So with these palm trees, I'm not painting in every leaf blade or every palm frond, just thinking of the shape as a whole. And there's another one here, a darker one. And with the tree trunks, I've not got a continuous line. It's lost and found in a few little gaps where the light might be catching that tree trunk. I've decided to have a little roof here, just above where I'm painting now, and there wasn't one there in the photo. Well, actually in the photo there was another sort of derelict boat up on the shore that, for me, I've excluded from my composition. I put in another basket boat there in the background, and I'll have a little sort of beach hut or something like that. So you can see with my brush strokes, I'm being quite erratic with this foliage. Different thicknesses of paint, different intensities of green, just as we've got in the, if you squint your eyes and look at the background, it can't be too detailed. If it's a bit too fussy, it leads you underneath this building here, this lean-to roof, now just defining the right hand edge of that other basket boat. Now I'm coming down to the fourth figure. Clean edge on that side, and then at right angles on the other side of the hat, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, bit of neutral tint. Then over the face, down around the edge of the figure and down to the back of the beach. And the edge of this beach is going to be irregular. There's little stones or boulders there at the back, so I don't want a straight edge. Behind that figure, over to the right, over the masking tape, so I get a nice smooth straight edge when I peel off the tape. Now the background is still damp, so I can go in and dab in some thicker colour like I'm doing now, some darker, thicker colour. It does need to be a little bit thicker here, otherwise you could have some blooms appearing, which you may not want. Well, you might want some blooms. They could actually, in foliage, they could actually make some quite pleasing shapes. Something that, watercolour does quite well. And so you might want that. Now, to create more of an impression of that building, I've painted in some loose lines there, just giving the appearance of, well, a corrugated sheeting or palm leaves or bamboo or something like that that's covering that hut. Next, I need to start creating a bit more of the form of the boat. So the background is done. Just touching it lightly with a finger to lift off a little bit of paint here and there. So I'm going to go down to a smaller synthetic brush for the next stage. Don't need to necessarily wait till the background is dry here, because if what I'm doing to the boats, if it bleeds into the background, that's going to serve to connect things a little bit more. So I've got here a small synthetic round brush. Starting from the left-hand side and the background boat, creating the shadow on the right, on the left of the boats, and then a little bit of shadow underneath the rim, this sort of thickish, almost like a tube or something. I'm not sure if it's a tube or a bit of curved material. I'm pretty sure it must be to do with flotation. And then a bit of shadow coming over to the left, a bit of shadow underneath the boat. Once I'm happy with that one, on to the next one. Shadow in the middle, a little bit thicker in the middle, then shadow underneath the rim, darker shadow on the left. So my first application, when I laid in the first wash, that wasn't dark enough. You can see it dried quite light, and likewise the blue boat, that's too light, that blue. I'm going to have to glaze over that. I'm going to have to go over with a second stronger layer. Shadow from that one. A little bit of shadow underneath. They are just like, this is almost like doing a still life with bowls. It's almost identical to that. These could be cups, wide cups, or cereal bowls or something like that. Just the same thing. Now, that guy on the left, these middle ones, main boat then, shadow, a darker colour for the middle, a bit thicker in the middle there. Shadow underneath, take the shadow beyond the side of the boat, because the rim is wider than the boat itself. So a little bit darker now for the shadow on this blue boat. That was ultramarine blue, bit of cobalt blue, bit of neutral tint, cobalt, ultramarine blue, cobalt. At this stage, I'm still thinking I can pull it off by that boat being so light, but I'm going to have to go a bit darker in that. Over to this right-hand boat, dark line in the middle, dark line under the rim. The start of some of these vertical lines that it's almost like a sort of stain in a way going down this blue but I'm pretty sure they are it's fiberglass material, and I suppose it's got to be the seawater and the sun that's bleaching it and creating those different intensities of blue. Bit of weathering of the boat. Few little bits of shadow on that green boat. Back to the blue one. And these brush strokes now, they're almost dry brush marks. There's not too much water on the brush. Pick up a dollop of red. There's some sort of red tarpaulin or something like that in this blue boat. I think it's quite nice having a little dab of red in there. There's lots of different objects coming out of these boats. The flags, poles, oars, of course. And some tarps covering things. Now, my brush here is a squirrel mop brush from Winsor & Newton. And for me, a good brush for laying down larger areas of shadow. And you get quite a nice, moving the brush from side to side, you get quite a nice edge and roundness to the shape of these shadows. I don't know what's creating these shadows. It could be a building, could be some more trees, but going over with this darker colour, yeah, that blue is not dark enough of that boat. It's connecting things. It's going to connect boats, it's going to connect the figures to the beach, and it will give a little bit more interest to the foreground as well. So I've elevated the boats a little bit higher than they were in the photographs, so it gives me a little bit more of the foreground to play with, and having in some vibrant shadows. There's the there's a shadow of that figure, shadows coming from the right, joining in with the figure, shadows of the back of the beach, just a few. So ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, get my words out right, alizarin crimson, cobalt blue, mix them all up and have a bit of fun. Brushstrokes in different directions. Dry brushstrokes, warms and cools, bit of yellow ochre as well, splash that in. Little areas will be left unpainted, and they can be little pebbles or stones or something like that on the beach. Carefully around the base of this blue basket boat, where I'm going to have to go darker on that boat. There we are, I'm glazing over it quite thick here. This is layer number 2. And as I did with the first layer, I've applied the paint, and now I want to just lift off a few areas of that blue, just to give it the feeling of a little bit of light and the curvature, the curve of this this round boat. Go quite dark. That's almost pure neutral tint there, which I don't often use, but sparingly in important little areas. I can dab that in. The foreground shadows, they're still quite damp. I've got that creates a nice sort of soft splodge in those areas on the beach. And back to the boat, back to the blue boat. Same brush I used in part number 1 of this painting, a kind of a medium-sized synthetic brush, and a Skoda brush. Yeah, I think it's a Skoda, and a Skoda Perla. There you are. That's the brush there. Don't often use this one, but it's quite good for lifting off. I think when you're lifting off watercolour, it needs to be a synthetic, or for me, a synthetic brush. A soft synthetic brush is quite good. If it was a very soft sort of squirrel mop brush, that can just be a little bit too soft. It doesn't give there needs to be a bit of resistance. There needs to be a bit of strength to the brush hairs to kind of lift it off, and being careful not to damage the surface of the watercolour paper. I mean, if you've got decent watercolour paper, they can be very tough and very forgiving of your treatment and lifting off when the paint's damp. But if you've got cheaper paper, then you've got to be really, really careful. Right, back to this green boat. So we're gradually getting now the feeling of the curvature of those boats, I feel. Dark, a bit more dark on the left-hand side. Bit of impact there, just where I am there. The light to the left and that dark, this dark shadow on this blue boat, I think, creates a little bit of an impact in that area, a bit of a statement in that area. And on the right-hand side, just a few more vertical lines. I can keep playing around with this for a long time. You've got to think, you've got to stop, decide when to stop adding in the detail. But this is a focal point, I think, of the painting, this blue boat, so spending a bit of time getting it right. Green boat, just a bit more detail shadow on the left hand side, and that background one there. Maybe there's another one over there in the background. Adding a bit of shadow just to the left of those lighter areas, and that can imply a pebble or a stone or something like that. Just where I've got little accidental lighter areas there. If you remember back earlier, I did a bit of splattering, and that made some light areas. Sometimes they can be a little bit too circular, maybe for this to make them into stones, but you can do a sort of similar thing, add in for a beach, add in a bit of darker value behind them to give a bit of shadow, a bit of form to it. Back with my small synthetic brush and adding in a few darks here and there in the background underneath the roof of that beach hut. A little bit of extra form to the back of the beach here. Maybe a few posts or poles in the ground. So this figure here, starting with the face underneath the conical hat, and then the left-hand side just a little bit darker than the right. Sun coming from the right, bit of cobalt blue there. Just drag, almost a dry brush strokes, just dragging a little bit of paint from the left-hand side. More poles, more need some vertical things in. I know I've got the tree trunks or the palm trees, but it's quite nice to have a few more verticals in the painting, just to add another sort of dimension to the background, so it's not too boring. Right, main two figures in the middle behind the blue boat, darker face, and then we'll keep the clothing fairly light. I think that looks okay against the darker background. And then this figure here, we'll have the, just do the face, and the figure was just had a little bit of a light wash over it. And then this fourth figure, dark face in the shade of that hat. And I'm going to go with a stripy top to this figure. Perhaps this figure has a bit of a long skirt or something like that. Don't want to draw too much attention to this figure, but yeah, I think that's going to work quite well in connecting the body to the shadow I'd done previously, just on that bottom right corner of the figure. Do a bit more connecting with the shadow. Make sure the left-hand side isn't too bright because the sun's coming from the right. You can see there's not much water on my brush at all. I'm just scraping off whatever's in the palette. Not too much water at all. Almost to the point where it's pure pigment at this stage. And in a way, I'm connecting with this little brush. I'm just going around to different parts of the painting and trying to be as conscious as I can, not to overdo things, but just try and connect different elements that I feel need strengthening a little bit more, or, as I say, connecting with other objects near them, just so that they're not too much on their own. Because the foreground now is, well, it's nearly dry, but when I apply extra paint now, it's going to give me a harder edge. Neutral tint, ultramarine blue, Phrygian green, burnt umber, neutral tint for some of these darks. Very, very dry brush marks, those. could actually, for this beach, could actually do a bit of splattering with dark paint in a controlled way. I could have put a piece of paper to protect the top half of the painting and then done some splattering with probably with a medium-sized brush fully loaded with dark paint. That might create some nice, the effect of little bits of shingle or darker rock on the beach. Instead, I'm using this sort of erratic dry brush marks just to, in a sort of artistic way, just balance up and give a bit more interest to the shadows, a bit more connecting. Keep it fairly light though for these marks in the distance. I don't want those to be too dark in the distance, otherwise it brings it a little bit too far forwards. And generally these lines at that angle like that, they're hopefully serving to just draw the viewer's eyes into the picture and towards the blue boat. Bit of final touching up in places before I use a little bit of white paint to bring out a few highlights. Got to be careful not to overdo that figure too much. For the white paint, I'm using a thin rigger brush from Lebenson, is the manufacturer, and this gives me quite a thin, almost the width of a hair, lines. Great for doing ropes or wires or branches, twigs of a tree. But just here and there, not too much. I don't think it actually needs too much of the highlighting. Perhaps a tiny bit on the top of some of these boats. Tops of little objects as well. As I normally do, a bit of a summary, a bit of a self-critique. Once I've done it, always looking at the painting and thinking what went okay and what maybe didn't go okay, but I think I achieved my goal of this scene with the basket boats. Well, there were three main things. The getting in these basket boats, very simple boats to paint, but the only tricky thing is these highlights here, the rim going across the top, and then the lighter areas below. As I say, think of them like cereal bowls, really. So first of all, getting in a mixture of these boats at subtle different angles, and then the conical shapes of these hats, and the background with some palm trees piercing the sky there. So a painting which used a number of different techniques, wet in wet, dry brush marks, graded wash as well, a bit of negative painting around the boats and these figures. And we've included some simple figures as well. But it didn't go, I mean, I did actually do this painting previously. Here's a first bash at it that I'd done previously. And I wasn't too happy for this for three reasons. I thought that the boat here, was not big enough. It needed to be bigger. Secondly, that old derelict boat didn't do it for me. I just didn't think it was interesting enough, or maybe quite difficult to do it justice. And then thirdly, the background's just too busy, too much going on. And with those harder edges, maybe if I had softer edges, it might have worked a bit better, but having those harder edges, it sort of brought it a bit too far forward. And also being red as well, that it was like a double whammy, bringing it all forward. So this was my second attempt. Happy with this one, making that boat bigger, making it the focal point as well, paying a little bit more attention to the hats, making sure the figure's heads sit well within the hat. They're quite low, these hats. They're almost, in a way, the bottom edge is almost touching the shoulders. So you've got to think with these hats, the actual head within them. So so that would be the head, if you like, or something like that. And this one, the head within that one. So trying to think of trying to get them sitting right. And I'm happy with the background, keeping it simple, nice and loose, just a few little sparkles left here and there, including that hut. I think if it was all green, it'd be a little bit too boring. But an opportunity to put in different shades of green, and also trying to keep the value light in the distance there. I could have actually, I think it might have been a little bit too dark. If I did it again, I might even go lighter still on some of these distant trees there, and maybe include a few more boats. Perhaps if I did this a third time, still have the focus of one boat being a different colour, but then include more boats. So this boat here, for example, it could be moved over to the right, and then I'd have more boats going off in the distance. But I still like the idea of the shadows coming across. I think I needed that to add something into that foreground, and connecting with these boats as well. So I hope you like that. Catch up with you on the next video.